Today I'll be talking about how to choose a main character, and if you've been watching my videos and following along so far on the 100 Days of Making Comics, it's likely you have like a zillion ideas for characters, settings, ideas, you name it at this point, and maybe you already are at this point even before watching the videos and you're trying to pick out who these people are going to be your main characters because you keep making characters, or maybe you want to turn like a roleplay plot into a story. Well, picking out a main character at a glance can seem simple enough. This is something I frequently struggle with. Why is that? Well, it's because main characters are a very important piece of the storytelling puzzle. While there are stories in the world with no main characters, or have evenly split roles of main characters, these are tricky and less common, and they usually involve a page count in the comics. In comic-wise, it comes up to a page count that is over the thousands of pages to pull off an evenly distributed main character situation. And even then, most stories like that have a mainest of main characters, the super duper main of all main characters. I'm sorry, I'm sick and rambling a little bit. There are many factors for choosing a main character, and almost all of them boil down to utility. I'll link my video about character above that I did just a few days ago, but in it I describe characters being created by three key characteristics: motivation, personality, and utility. So as a refresher, personality is how a character acts, motivation is why a character acts, and utility is what a character is needed for. Selecting a main character involves finding a character that's motivation and personality lend well to the main character role and what that requires. I often start with a main character and find that they don't really mesh well with the role. In those cases, I either change the main character or I tweak their motivations and personality, because these three elements need to be in balance. Each informs the other. And sort of what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a plot where we're interested in telling a big adventure type story, and the main character is then needed to be someone that is motivated to go on said adventure and not enjoy the time, but at least go on the adventure and be fun to hang around while they do so. Okay, but our main character, their personality is that they are stubborn and they just want to stay home and be left alone. It can work, but in order to strike a balance, you have to either change the personality or add pressure through giving more motivation, since motivation can sometimes override a trait, because personality is how they act, but motivation is why, and changing the why can change how they react without changing their entire personality. Like, typical pitfalls I come across when creating main characters is that I make them too competent. I have the opposite problem of them not wanting to go on adventures. It's usually easier to drag a character on an adventure. It's sometimes harder to slow a character down, especially one who's very entrenched in the world, knows what they're doing, and just wants to go. They can kind of end up leaving your readers behind. So when you're trying to make an adventure story or something set in a strange new world, and you have a very motivated character, there's kind of a tried and true method of making these characters work, and that is to make them an outsider type character, so that at the very least, while this character is going on their adventure and learning and exploring, so is your reader, and they're both gaining the same understanding at the same time. It's a very simple way to create a story, and really good for beginners and advanced writers alike. It's fine to do this. And while like your initial response to that might be kind of adding a human character into your fantastical world to just look around it, you don't have to be like that. As long as they're separate from the story that you want to tell, or kind of the culture where your story is taking place in, you're gonna be okay, right? If you're writing about a vampire story, like we keep going back to, the main character can be some sort of outsider human type, but they can also be a vampire from a different culture, a new vampire, a young vampire. They could be a werewolf. They can be anything cool. Think about any character that would have interest in learning more and pursuing the plot, and you can then contrast that with their experiences. And then through that, you can explain to the reader both where your main character comes from and this new world at the same time. It does double duty. It's really great. But if you're creating a story where a big event occurs and changes the status quo, you don't need a outsider character at that point. You just need to set up what this main character's status quo is. Like, if you're writing about an apocalypse that happens, you can have a character that's just living in that world. You don't need a newcomer. Whereas if you are going to be writing about something that's already happened in this world and everyone's already caught up about it, and it would be strange to have a character who's living in this world and is like, what's going on? That's where you're gonna have issues. Keep that in consideration when you are choosing your main character. You want to be able to explain things without it sounding like your character somehow like fell asleep during all of the major important events of their culture's history and recent history, you know? Okay, I hope that makes sense. So yeah, be aware what your character needs to be able to do in the story, and make a character that will step up to the plate. Another consideration about main characters is to pick one that's fun to write about. Like, just because a certain thing is required of your main character doesn't mean they have to be bland. Like, make sure you choose a character that excites you, that has flaws, that has room to grow, and that you like to be around, because you're going to be with this character for a very long time. So make sure that they excite you. Don't shy away from like chosen one stories or secret superpowered heroes. They exist in media. It's fine. Don't worry. If you like to do it, just write the story that you like to write, okay? And if something sounds cool to you, just do it. Sometimes your really cool characters aren't going to end up working, but just because they're not the lead of your story doesn't mean you don't have to have fun with them. Doesn't mean you don't get to have them. Like, background characters are perfectly fine. A lot of times, someone who doesn't really work well as a background character because they're very subtle works better as a main character because you get to know them a lot better. Whereas if they're in the background, they just kind of come off as bland. You know, each character is suited for their role. And I personally like kind of unexpected main characters. Like, if I was to have like a fantasy adventure story, like we're saying, choosing like a fighting mercenary type, that's a little boring to me personally. Like, I would rather do something about a plumber and then toss them into the fantasy world and make them do all the things that a normal fighter would do. It just adds a bit of interest for me, personally. When you're writing someone like that, don't just completely ditch their personality as soon as they become a fighter person for the story, you know? Always lean into their strengths and help them overcome their weaknesses. And just have fun. Just have fun, guys, when you're picking your main characters. Except when you have to realize that this character you love just doesn't work as a main character and they have to be a background character because they just don't have that kind of room to grow. Then you can be a bit sad. But don't be sad for long. Pick someone cool to replace them. And yeah, you can always change your main character if the script isn't working. You can demote characters and reframe the story to someone else. And just play around and see what ends up working and who services the story the best. As we move into outlines in my next video, you'll kind of see how a main character shapes the story. At least I think you will. I don't know. I'm kind of sick right now. I'm sorry if these are a little off. Yeah, but I'll go in depth with that if I remember to. Hopefully I feel better tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Remember stuff. Okay, goodbye.